Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to have you here this morning at the end of a very long climate week. Thank you all very much for coming. On behalf of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and the Science Panel for the Amazon, I'm pleased to welcome you to this dialogue on risk and opportunities for climate finance for the restoration and the sustainable development of the Amazon. We are delighted to have IDB Invest as partners in this convening. The Amazon, as you all know, is the largest tropical forest in the world. It's one of the most critical elements of the Earth climate system. It is home to a remarkable share of known global biodiversity and provides unique ecosystem services of global and regional significance. The Paris Agreement of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees will not be met without the conservation of the Amazon. The Amazon covers almost half of South America and is home to close to 40 million people, including more than 300 indigenous people, communities residing in the Amazon. Hence, the conservation and sustainable development of the Amazon are central for the future of the region. The Science Panel for the Amazon was established to make a clear scientific case for conservation on the Amazon and address widespread deforestation, forest degradation, and wildfires that have intensified over the last few years. Today, the panel is composed of over 280 scientists from the region, including indigenous people science. Its first assessment report has been called an encyclopedia of the Amazon region. The Science Panel is engaged in dialogues with multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the National Development Bank of Brazil, which recently has established a fund for restoration informed by one of the Science Panel policy briefs on arcs of restoration. The panel alerted of the risk of tipping points in the region, but also identified risks and opportunities to advance sustainable development. Today, you will hear from leading authors of the panel on the potential on restoration, sustainable infrastructure, and social bioeconomy. We look forward also to hear from developers and investors on the potential of climate finance for conservation, and also learn from them what are the kind of scientific issues that, from their perspective, the panel should address to inform large-scale financing for conservation in the Amazon. We see this dialogue as one of a series of dialogues on a road to COP30 Belém, the first COP that will take place in the Amazon, and that they could contribute to advance investment and financial strategies to address the urgency of conserving the Amazon. Thank you again very much for coming.
Thank you, Emma. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of IDB Invest, the private sector arm of the IDB, I also wanted to welcome everyone. The IDB has been working in the Amazon for 50 years or over 50 years, but really our focus really started to sharpen 10 years ago thanks to the recommendations from a panel chaired by Tom Lovejoy, but where Emma was a big voice. So it's really nice to be hosting this panel with Emma. And just last year, IDB launched Amazonia Forever, which is a coalition of very different actors trying to increase finance and promote collaboration in the Amazon. Amazonia Forever includes a coalition of ministers of finance of all the Amazonian countries, and that's really the heart of the conversation. But it also brings together majors from several Amazonia cities, also banks. We have the Amazon Finance Network with more than 50 commercial banks working in the Amazon, regional development banks from different countries in the Amazon, as well as research centers across Amazon countries as well. So the spirit really is to have conversations that involve different stakeholders. And today's is a really good example where we have, on the one hand, the scientific perspective, and then on the other hand, the perspective from different private sector actors, which we think are going to play a really big role in the sustainable development of the region. So very excited to be here. Thanks all for coming. And back to you, Emma.
Thank you, Jaime. As you all know, Brazil is a leader in tropical forest diplomacy, and they are advancing a number of very interesting initiatives in different global forums, including the Tropical Forest Forever Fund. I am delighted to have with us, and it's a great honor to have with us as our keynote speaker, Ambassador Correa do Lago, Secretary for Climate, Energy, and Environment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Correa do Lago has an outstanding diplomatic career, including more recently as ambassador to Japan and India, and represents Brazil in several multilateral negotiations. He was a chief negotiator on Rio Plus 20 and on several of the climate change negotiations and the UNFCCC. Ambassador Correa do Lago, it's an honor. The floor is yours.
Emma, thank you very much. So I'm so glad to be here, surrounded by many friends with whom I've been trying to understand better and better the Amazon. You all know much more than I do, but I'm going to try to tell you a bit what this government is planning for the next 2 years, with an objective of 2 years. No, it's already one and a half, but with a view to arrive at COP30 with a very significant contribution to the discussion of tropical forests. I could talk for hours, but don't worry, I'm not going to do that, because I want to listen to you much more than speak. But I'm going to be very try to put the things as linearly as possible. And it all starts with the fact that the president, when I was invited for this function, the president had already decided that the COP would be in the Amazon. And having the COP in the Amazon is a considerable challenge from many points of view. And one of them is a challenge to the traditional position of Brazil regarding forests, which is to more and more recognize how deforestation is the source of the main source of Brazilian emissions, and at the same time remind the world that ending deforestation will not solve the problem of climate change, since it's less than 10% of the emissions. But so doing it in the Amazon, many people said, it's going to be the COP of the forest. No, it's going to be a COP in the forest, but we all know that if we want to be serious about climate change, it has to be a COP on fossil fuels, because that is what really matters and is the main subject. But at the same time, there is a huge expectation that Brazil will come with ideas that will allow a more sophisticated debate about the issue of forests. And I believe that it is somehow our obligation to do that, because we have science among the countries that have tropical forests. I believe that we have the best scientists, the best institutions, the best academics. And so I'm very glad to be here, because it is the fact that you have put together all these scientists and that you have incorporated traditional knowledge into the exercise that you are developing. This helps enormously Brazil to show the world that we are serious about tropical forests and we want to find solutions for the tropical forests. And so, since we believe we have to present something very strong in Belém, we started by organizing the Belém meeting of last year, in August last year, the summit of the countries with that are part of the OTCA. It's not OTCA in English, it's ACTO, I think, yeah. But it is the organization of the cooperation of the Amazon countries. And this summit was very important, because we had to start first with our own region and to have the support of our own region. And thanks to all of you, by the way, we could incorporate in the Declaration of Belém for the first time the idea of the tipping points, because it had been developed by scientists that have the credibility, and at the same time, you know that Brazil is a bit, the Brazilian diplomacy has been very often a little paranoid about forestry and things like that, and the fact that most of them are scientists that are totally committed to Brazil or are Brazilian. This brings this dimension of an internal movement that is very important to legitimize this effort internally. So we started with this declaration of Belém, but in parallel to that declaration, there was another declaration, and it's a declaration, a very modest declaration, called United by Our Forests, because we needed to do something with the guest countries. President Lula had invited the two Congos, Indonesia, and also we also had the presence of St. Vincent and the Grenadines because they were presiding CELAC. But anyway, so these countries also had forests. So we did a parallel declaration. And in this parallel declaration, we decided to expand this and offer other countries to join in this declaration. Now we have not only the 8 Amazonic countries, the 2 Congos, Indonesia, St. Vincent, but now we have Mexico, we have Guatemala, we have Malaysia, we have Sri Lanka. So it's growing, very important forestry countries. And what do we want to do with that? We want to bring together as many tropical countries with developing countries with tropical forests. We want to bring as many as possible. There are, in our count, 67. So we want to bring as many as possible to study, to understand in a bottom-up exercise what is available to preserve forests and to restore forests. What are the instruments that we have internationally? And we are going to present that in Cali in the first 2 days in Cali. We have, basically, as a simplification, we have, we believe, 10 types of instruments. So to have finance for countries that have tropical forests. But one of the reasons why we're doing this is that we think there is a huge mess about the finance for forestry, a huge confusion between conservation, between restoration, a huge confusion with carbon credits, a huge confusion with RED. I mean, everything ended up becoming a big confusion. And we want to bring the developing countries together so that they understand which directions they can go to. And this also is based on the fact that we recognize, even in Brazil, that each Amazonic state in Brazil has completely different challenges, and they need different solutions depending on the state, depending even on the region of the states, no, because they are so big. So you end up having in Brazil almost all the circumstances that you will find in other tropical countries. So this will serve not only the other countries, but obviously it will also serve Brazil. So I wanted to tell you that we continue to need you, and the work that you are developing, because we want everything we're going to present to be based on science and integrity. Because we think that, unfortunately, there is some lack of integrity in some of the proposals that circulate. And in parallel to that, and trying to have let's say, a coherence between what the government is doing in all the Brazilian presidencies. We're now presiding G20. Next year, we preside BRICS Plus, the exciting challenge, as you can imagine. And at the end, the COP, we want to have a very coherent work that brings positive elements for this discussion. So we had in the G20, we're happy that we could approve the high-level principles on bioeconomy, which is an initiative of Brazil. This was never discussed in the G20 before, and we thought it was essential to start the discussion from a developing country presiding the G20. And by the way, I have to thank Marcelo, who is somewhere. Yeah, where is he? Obviously behind, yeah. Very discreet, always very discreet. But and we had a huge support from science, from NGOs, from think tanks. I mean, it was really we worked together very positively, and we hope we can continue to do that up to COP30. So I believe we have a roadmap. And I believe that this roadmap will really contribute to this issue of climate finance and sustainable development of the Amazon. So I'm going to stop here, but I will be delighted to answer questions eventually and participate actively in the debates that you're going to provoke. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Very inspiring remarks, and I think it's fantastic that that you will benefit, will draw from the knowledge of the Science Panel of the Amazon. And I have to say that one of the major areas of work has been precisely bioeconomy. And I'm very happy that the government of Brazil obviously has developed tremendously on this field, including now as part of the principles of the G20. It's fantastic. I would like now to invite some of the scientists that came to work with us today and dialogue particularly on terms of opportunities that the risks and opportunities that the panel has identified as we move for sustainable development in the region. And I would like first to introduce Roxanna Barrantes. Dr. Roxanna Barrantes is a lead author of the Science Panel for the Amazon and member of the Board of Directors of the Central Bank of Peru. She's a principal professor at the University Catholic of Peru, and she has engaged in research in economies of natural resources and evaluation of telecommunications infrastructure. She's been one of the lead authors of this policy brief on sustainable infrastructure. Roxanna, please.
Good morning. It is really a pleasure for me to be here, sharing this exciting opportunity to interact with the people getting the money and the people designing the policies, and academia, who is trying to provide evidence in order to get these two components aligned with the provision of ecosystem services and the vitality of our planet. This is the name of the policy brief that we produce, along with Roberto Schaefer as a lead author, and several other colleagues who are currently working on providing the evidence necessary to inform policy making for infrastructure development. Here is also the link that you can consult in order to access the policy brief. So, what is our main message? Our main message is that we need a new sustainable infrastructure paradigm for Amazonian development, and that is composed of these five ideas. Firstly, to shift priorities from national objectives to the needs of local populations and environmental concerns. This should come hand in hand. What we have witnessed over the last decades in Amazonia is national objectives leading the way and multilaterals not being able, through their environmental safeguards, to provide the counterbalance to rapid profit producing and exploitation of natural resources. So, first idea, we need a priority shift. The second one is that priority shift should be based on the spatial configuration to adapt existing infrastructure and also planning and building new ones. The third idea that we propose in our policy brief is a ban on new large dams. This shouldn't be part of the infrastructure that is financed by these complicated schemes and the money that is flowing around the world in order to have this vital part of the ecosystem and the heart of our planet working properly to provide the services. Finally, two specific ideas for finding new ways to guarantee safe drinking water and sanitation. We need more money for research too, in order to adapt technologies or to come up with new technologies in order to secure safe drinking water and sanitation for local populations. And it will be a challenge to host the amount of people that attend a COP in the Amazon. That will be an excellent testbed for several of these new solutions that are currently being researched, and some of them at the pilot stage. Finally, digital connectivity is strategic. And we must thank the current technological development that allows low orbit satellites and other solutions in order to provide digital connectivity as a means to get all of us, not only local peoples, but all of us connected in order to be integrated into the national economy and national society, and also as a means to secure funding through the possibilities that blockchain technologies allow us to make contracts in order to secure the places and assure the characteristics of the places that are being protected by different initiatives by all of us. I would love to continue, but I think there is a lot to talk about, and I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roxanna. This is excellent. It is exactly the kind of things that the panel is exploring. What it is sustainable infrastructure in the Amazon. And that will be relevant for other basins as well, like, for instance, the Congo Basin. They're also exploring things, what does it mean to have a sustainable city in the Amazon, which will be, again, relevant for sustainable cities in basins like Congo that is with a tremendous growing population. Thank you, Roxanna. Let me now have the pleasure to introduce Ricardo Abramovay, again, a lead author of the Science Panel for the Amazon, a professor at the Environmental Science Program at the University of São Paulo. Ricardo is engaged in research on socio-environmental impacts of global agri-food systems, and he has a leading author on bioeconomy. Ricardo.
Thank you. Thank you. First, many thanks for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here with very good friends, and it's a real pleasure to speak to you this morning. First, I'd like it. It's not working. So, thank you. I'm sure you can't read, but I put this just to highlight the importance of the document approved by the G20 on bioeconomy under the leadership of Itamaraty. And all we know, the hard time that the negotiation took. Some colleagues claim that it's abstract and generic. I don't agree with this view. The document establishes values and principles, and bioeconomy, rather than an economic sector, is an ethical normative value created to orient the way societies use the resource and the ecosystem services that our economies are based on. This is very important, and I stress the 6 first paragraphs among the 10, because it touches biodiversity, social participation, fight inequality, etc. This is the main message of our chapter, which has been disseminated in op-eds in Brazilian newspapers such as Valor Econômico, Folha de São Paulo, and has resulted in at least 2 scientific works published in Ecological Economics and Nature, Ecology and Evolution. These works raise a fundamental question for our panel. If you see this figure, I think the bars is soy, cattle, corn, coffee, and bioeconomy products. We see the gap in the financing of bioeconomy products compared to the dominant products of our agriculture. Our work raises a fundamental question for our panel. What do we want to finance? I think this question is absolutely crucial. If I had to summarize the answer to this question in one single word, it would be diversity. It's almost self-evident that diversity refers to forest conservation and forest regeneration, but it refers also to non-timber products. In the Amazon, we must avoid the trap contained in the idea that the economy of forest social biodiversity depends on scaling the exploitation of its products and increasing the productivity of this exploitation. Scale supposes specialization, monotony, and it's not compatible with the life of the forest. Valorizing forest products requires specific infrastructure for local transformation based on technology accessible to local populations. The new paradigm that Roxanna mentions belongs to this kind of thought. Valmir Ortega will talk about this this morning. It demands refrigeration capacities. It requires the local economy to be freed from its dependence on fossil fuels. And it needs good quality connectivity. Conexão Povos da Floresta is an initiative very important in this sense. Unfortunately, the plans of governmental and multilateral agencies for infrastructure are far from this priority. I developed these ideas in this book, and this card show the integration routes that this plan are driven by commodity production, which in the Amazon contradicts what the bioeconomy is meant to protect. However, aside from infrastructure, 2 other fundamental issues must be addressed. The first is that bioeconomy must inspire the ecological transformation of animal production in the Amazon, which accounts for 40% of Brazil's livestock herd. Embrapa has created moderate intensification techniques, introducing legumes and trees, and diversifying pastures with the potential to reduce the area occupied by cattle farming and its emissions. This is an example of how bioeconomy must go beyond the forest social biodiversity economy. The second concern is the cities. Marcelo Medeiros, Marina Barbosa will talk about ReGreen. But not only are Amazonian cities the least tree covered in Brazil, but the potential for urban agriculture is enormous. In concluding, the main obstacle to the emergence of a strong bioeconomy doesn't lie in the financial engineering that we could conceive to improve it. Our main challenge is to entitle forest, rural, and urban communities with the institutional and material infrastructure by which they would be the main protagonists of the bioeconomy, as is recommended by the G20 Bioeconomy Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. And we have, I have to introduce Dr. Catarina Jakovac, and she's going to be coming online. Please. Thank you. Thank you, Catarina. Thank you for joining us. Catarina is a lead author of the Science Panel of the Amazon, a tropical forest ecologist, and she's engaged in research on ecological restoration, focusing on understanding forest regeneration and how it can help restore ecosystems, how is it changing in response to land use and climate change. Catarina.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be able to pass some messages to you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm going to talk about restoration in the Amazon. That's a policy brief we are producing now, but the SPA has produced already another policy brief talking about transforming the Amazon through arcs of restoration. So more than 20% of the Amazon region has been deforested, and it's continuously being deforested. So every year we lose around 1 million hectares of forest. So when we talk about restoration, we have to take into account that we also need to stop deforestation. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right? If we continue in this business as usual, we will be losing 8 more million hectares until 2030. And at the same time, the countries, Amazonian countries, have signed international agreements to restore 30% of the degraded lands, of the degraded ecosystems, which would mean something around more than 30 million hectares only in the Amazon. So with this, I already want to pass you 2 messages. One is that conserving the forests that we have there should be always a priority, also for financing restoration. This should be one of the aims for restoration, because these forests are irreplaceable, and also that there are lots of opportunities, different opportunities for restoration, and I'm going to talk more about that. So we want to shift the Amazon from these deforestation, arcs of deforestation, to arcs of restoration. And here, to represent restoration, I bring a kind of a messy regrowing forest and not a child planting a tree, because we really need to change this view on what is restoration. Restoration is not about planting seedlings everywhere, but it's about supporting different strategies to recover the forest. And just to bring the concept of ecosystem restoration that the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is bringing. Ecosystem restoration means assisting the recovery of ecosystems that have been degraded and destroyed, along with the conservation of ecosystems that are still intact. And it includes a range of strategies. Here I will talk about specifically the ecological restoration, so this more green, this green in the figure, which aims to recover fully recover native ecosystems or partially recover these native ecosystems. So it's based on native species, on the functionality of ecosystems. And here you might have heard about two ways of restoring: passive restoration and active restoration. Passive restoration would be natural regeneration. You just let nature do the job. And seedling planting, which is bringing seeds and seedlings to the area. Why do I talk about this very technical aspect? Is because the financing schemes often bring to the projects goals that are measured with number of planted trees, for example, or area planted. And we need, again, to shift that and to see all the other benefits and measure the success of restoration also for the financing schemes in different ways. For example, natural regeneration can have a higher capacity of bringing resilient forests that are able to, that are adapted to climate changes more than the seedling plantings. On the other hand, seedling plantings can bring more benefits, social benefits related to job creation, forest products related to a bioeconomy that Ricardo was talking about, food sovereignty, and other social benefits. Together with that, it means demands for job, for labor, for maintenance, for seeds and seedlings. So seeds and seedlings must be, we need to bring supply and value chain for restoration within this bioeconomy structure. So the costs of restoring with these different methods are very different. Natural regeneration is relatively cheap and can provide a great opportunity for large-scale restoration. I'm not sure how much time I have. Maybe I have to run a bit. So just to show you that the message here is that there are different ways of restoring, and we have different actors locally. And those different actors might have different interests in restoration. So we have, when we think about the Amazon, many times we are only thinking about the indigenous people and the riverine communities, but we also have the large-scale farmers who need to engage in restoration as well, because they are large-scale, middle-scale farmers. They are occupying the largest areas of this deforested Amazon. And we need to bring them in through, for example, carbon credits, biodiversity credits, of course, avoiding the wrongdoings that we are seeing and complying with ethic principles, but there are lots of opportunities for restoration, and they should be tailored to the socioeconomic contexts.
Catarina.
So some final...
Good, sorry, just 1 minute, okay?
Yeah, just to wrap up. So the main message is that we need to engage local stakeholders, need to be flexible in resource use, because we need adaptive management to be able to restore resilient forests, need to promote a restoration, supply and value chain, and that agrees with the bioeconomy principles. Consider natural forest regeneration for achieving large-scale restoration as a restoration strategy that also needs financing, and accommodate the conservation of the standing forest in the restoration financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catarina. Very, very illustrative of the complexity of restoration. Thank you. Now, Jaime?
So now we will transition to the panel conversation. You'll notice that a lot of the voices you will hear now come from the private sector, and the reason is because within the private sector will play a very important role in the process. The Amazon countries and Latin America at large are facing a triple challenge. On the one hand, citizens are demanding better services and equality, rightly so. On the other hand, governments are facing very hard fiscal constraints. So the ability to provide on those requirements for the population are very limited. And in particular in the Amazon, this gets very exacerbated with the climate crisis. So these combinations of factors means that the government is looking for the private sector to take a stronger role in supporting the sustainable development of the region. And the way we look at it in very simplistic terms at IDB Invest is we have probably lower hanging opportunities in urban areas in the Amazon and maybe long-term, more complex opportunities in rural areas. In cities, I think a lot of what was discussed in terms of infrastructure, we need that shift of paradigm and do infrastructure that is for the people, but there are areas where the private sector knows how to invest and has been investing in, and we could probably support the development of thriving cities. And we need thriving cities in the Amazon because this will take economic pressure out of the forest. So one element is in the short term, invest in cities to create opportunities and take that economic pressure out of the forest. And then in the longer term, there are the areas of bioeconomy and conservation, reforestation, which for sure there are opportunities for the private sector, but they are much more complex. There are financial risks, but very importantly, there are social, environmental, reputational risks that the private sector needs to be able to address. And it's also important to recognize that the private sector has been part of some of the problems when it comes to illegal mining, illegal deforestation, and the cattle sector, for example, has had an important role in deforestation. So there's great opportunities there, but risk is the name of the game in terms of how does the private sector contribute in a way that is positive, but also that is financially viable, which is the only way the private sector is a part of it. So to start this conversation, I wanted to ask Ilona Szabo. Ilona is the president of Instituto Igarapé. In Brazil, working on solutions for climate, for digital, for people in the Amazon, to lay out the land in terms of roadblocks and opportunities for private investment in the Amazon. Ilona?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Jaime, for the invitation. Wonderful to be here with you. Sorry to be late. We were debriefing on the Summit of the Future with the DSG, so very important link to our everything we're doing here as well. So I think, we have a need and an opportunity, and I'll stick to the theme of restoration. The need is to comply with our national NDCs in the whole region. The land use restoration is part of the country's commitment to the Climate Paris Agreement, to the Global Biodiversity Framework, to our national NDCs. Just in Brazil alone, 12 million hectares, plus, if you go to the Pará state, 5.6 million alone. So there is an immense need, an urgency. So therefore, an opportunity, because this would be, let's say, assisted. Its part will be natural regeneration, but the degradation of pasture is so big that we have a huge opportunity for private sector. And what we're seeing, and especially this week here in New York, a lot to talk about climate and development, but nature is still very far away from discussions within, outside the UN, and like private forums. Nature, as let's say, as an asset class, is something still very tricky, very risky for many people. And we've been trying to de-risk these conversations. And the work we do at the Igarapé Institute, we decided to, instead of saying, oh, it's too risky, it's too complex, there's security issues, there are regulatory issues, so, and don't come, it's basically how do we put this lens of risk into, how do we de-risk, not only finance, not only regulation, but how do we de-risk these territories? And we've been working to develop frameworks on really materializing what is uncertain, what is informal, what is illegal, into objectives and goals that we can collectively tackle. Because all these risks are not risks that one company, one financial institution, one government, like one layer of the government can do alone. So it's a collective, and we see this as common public good goals. So from really putting a premium on land tenure, to enforcing the rule of law in these territories, because this not only will protect the people that are there, but will also allow for, let's say, us to really curb what is happening when you go into dealing with government relations sometimes in the local level. They just take you to corruption, to extortion, to actually feeding the illicit economies that we want to push away. Of course, the premium of dealing from the beginning the right way with the communities that are there. If you don't do that, if you don't include, you're not going to, anyhow, deal with the permanence issues of all these economies. So this is absolutely key. This is not a nice add-on. This is just from start. It's just also absolutely key for success. And of course, we have to really assist the local governments, and including the state levels, but federal as well, in improving the policy mechanism. So for instance, we've been really pushing for shared risks in the concession policies. We don't believe that if the government doesn't step up to say to the implementers of the restoration projects that they're going to share the risks of invasion, share the risks of fire, share the wider risks of permanence, we won't be able to do it at the scale we need. And when we say scale here is respecting nature, but restoration, we have dozens of millions of hectares that we need to restore to be able to also create these arcs of restoration. So I think there is the challenges is to put the risks into the picture, not below the carpet, because that's how we've been dealing with that. That's the only way we're going to face the informality, the illegality. So face it, de-risk these territories, and this is a joint approach. Of course, government, huge responsibility, civil society, local partners, but also, again, the private sector, entrepreneurs, financiers have to come with the right framework. So that's also something that we've been working with the private and financial sectors to put in the guidelines for investment in the due diligence process, but also in the monitoring of high-integrity portfolios. And finally, just to bring the innovations that are coming to the table as well. So like many new financial mechanisms, I think the government of Brazil is pushing for like the payment for hectare. So recognizing there is a value in nature, an intrinsic value that we have to start talking about. So for example, the Tropical Forest for Fire Forever Facility or something like this, TFFF, but also biodiversity credits that are coming along the way. But just to say, we have to bring this conversation to the global tables. It's a very localized issue. And I mean, we don't have much time to mobilize this capital. A lot of talk, very little capital lending. I'm sure we can be part of this conversation in de-risking territories, finance, and regulation, but we need to also put as a moral need to just take this risk collectively. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ilona. I think this concept of the risk in territories is very valuable, and it really resonates with the perspective of those that are trying to develop their business from the private sector. I wanted to pass out the word now to Valmir Ortega. Valmir is the CEO of Belterra, and Belterra is one of the companies that is trying to develop a business model around restoration in partnership with small farmers. So, Valmir, it would be interesting to hear about your experience and also what are some of the roadblocks that you've been finding along the way.
Thank you, Jaime. I speak in Portuguese, but sorry, let's Isabella translate for us. O grande desafio da restauração é que nós estamos falando de milhões de hectares, né? A gente não está falando de áreas pequenas, nós não estamos falando de um desafio pequeno. Portanto, restaurar milhões de hectares na floresta, na Amazônia, na região amazônica, vai exigir diferentes modelos, diferentes estratégias, diferentes abordagens do ponto de vista de operação, de modelos de negócio, de escalas de negócio, mas também vai exigir uma multiplicidade de fontes de financiamento que permitam que esses diferentes modelos, essas diferentes escalas prosperem. Sorry.
So Valmir was saying that the greatest challenge of restoration is that it's millions of hectares that are needed. So to restore millions of hectares in the Amazon requires different models, strategies, approaches in different scales and business models, but also in a multiplicity of financing resources.
Aqui na mesa nós temos pelo menos 2 modelos, né, de negócio, ReGreen e Belterra, que são bem diferentes do ponto de vista da escala, mas que têm muita sinergia potencial em territórios, em paisagens. No caso da Belterra, nós somos, na verdade, 2 companhias. A Belterra focada em restauração com agroflorestas especialmente com pequenos e médios produtores, também com grandes produtores, mas preferencialmente com pequenos e médios, o que significa um desafio adicional. E pequenos e médios por quê? Porque, no caso do Brasil, nós temos 6 milhões, ou um pouco mais de 6 milhões de produtores. Mais de 5 milhões desses produtores são pequenos e médios produtores. A grande maioria desses pequenos e médios produtores não conseguem acessar crédito adequado, não conseguem acessar assistência técnica, menos de 20% tem assistência técnica continuada e adequada, e a grande maioria deles depende de uma cadeia imensa de intermediários para colocar seu produto no mercado. Portanto, sem dúvida, o segmento da agricultura brasileira que mais precisa de apoio e que, potencialmente, na linha do que o Ricardo apresentou no desafio de diversificar a produção alimentar, de diversificar a produção na paisagem, de romper a tendência de monocultura que nós temos e de simplificação que nós temos na paisagem, trabalhar com agricultura familiar, trabalhar com produção de alimento e, no nosso caso, trabalhar com o sistema agroflorestal é a melhor opção. Combinado com a Belterra, nós criamos agora, no último ano, uma nova empresa chamada Rio Capim. Criamos uma empresa chamada Rio Capim, que é justamente de intensificação de pecuária em sistemas silvopastoris, que é uma forma de reduzir a área ocupada pela pecuária e liberar terras para restauração, seja para a restauração da Belterra, seja para a restauração da ReGreen ou de outras empresas. Portanto, de novo, um modelo que permite criar sinergia para restaurar em larga escala.
So Valmir was saying that in Belterra they have, here in the table they have two different models, ReGreen and Belterra. They work in different scales, but they have a lot of synergies in territories and landscape. Belterra works a lot with small and medium producers, because Brazil has over 6 million producers and more than 5 million are small producers. Most of them cannot access adequate credit, technical assistance, and most of them depends on intermediaries to put their products in the market. So they really need support, and so it's important to diversify the food production, work with family agriculture, SAFIs, and yes, agroforestry systems and silvopastoral systems. So I'm almost finishing. So Belterra, they created this new enterprise called Rio Capim, which aims to intensify agrosystems and livestock in order to liberate more land for restoration.
E, para finalizar, Jaime, imagino que, do ponto de vista de estrutura de financiamento, né, nós temos, nesses diferentes modelos, seja modelos de restauração ecológica em larga escala, mais baseado em fontes de receita alavancada por carbono, ou seja, no nosso caso, na Belterra, modelos de negócio alavancado por produtos, né, cacau, açaí e outras cadeias de produto, dependem de diferentes modelos de negócio. No nosso caso, em particular, a gente tem montado estruturas de blend finance, tem montado estruturas de financiamento com bancos e com instituições bancárias, mas de uma forma que eu diria que ainda frente ao tamanho do agronegócio brasileiro, de uma forma bastante injusta. Ou seja, esse mercado emergente de restauração ecológica, esse mercado emergente de sistemas agroflorestais, esse mercado emergente de novos modelos produtivos, tem que ter um esforço gigante para construir estruturas de blend finance, estruturas de financiamento, para alavancar e conseguir juros para os seus financiamentos na faixa de 12%, 14%, 15%. Enquanto nós temos talvez o maior programa de blend finance do Brasil, que é o Plano Safra, que financia soja, pecuária e outras cadeias a 7%, a 6%, a 8%. Né? Então, assim, nós precisamos disputar o financiamento público. É fundamental ter políticas públicas de financiamento para dar escala a esses modelos de negócio. E aí, sim, combinado com o investimento privado, criar estruturas que permitam esses negócios crescer na escala que necessitam, seja via equity, seja via financiamento, seja via outros modelos de negócio.
So in terms of financing structure, there are large-scale businesses that are using carbon markets, or in the case of Belterra, it's sorry, the product. They focus more on the products of cacao, acai. So they depend on different business models. Belterra has been working with different finance structures of blend finance, but it still is it's difficult to compete with the major large-scale livestock credits and sorry, I'm mixing a little bit. So, for example, they can get credits in 12, 14, or 15%. Meanwhile, the Plano Safra finances soy for 7 and 8%. So it's really hard to compete with large-scale livestock and agriculture. But together with the finance sector and private sector, we can increase the scale of the sustainable business models.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Valmir. So I think you gave us some ideas of the risking approaches that the public sector could take, and it has to do with subsidies, both on the way in which subsidies are helpful as well as on the way that subsidies can be harmful or detracting from the right investments. And I also appreciate what you were saying about the territorial approach, which Ambassador Correa de Lago said in the beginning. This is not a one-size-fits-all type of solution. It has to be very rooted on the specific circumstances of different places. So thanks a lot for that. I wanted to pass now to Marcelo Medeiros, the chairperson of ReGreen. ReGreen has the goal of restoring 1 million hectares of degraded land. So I wanted to hear, as we were saying, this is a complementary approach, another business model. I wanted to hear about your experience, Marcelo, and again, what are other roadblocks or the risking approaches that could help you expand and reach that goal of 1 million hectares?
Okay, well, thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Emma, for the invitation. Maybe I should start by explaining why 1 million hectares. We talk so much about millions of hectares here that maybe I should give a little bit of explanation how we came up with the idea of doing 1 million hectares. When 4 years ago, when Bernardo Strasbourg and I, we decided to create ReGreen, one of the first things that we thought of was how big should it be? And typically when you start a business plan, you look at the addressable market and you have a target of what a market share you can have. And we try to do this. And if our market is capturing carbon from the atmosphere, we have 15 gigatons of carbon to be captured. We would be less than a drop in the ocean. If we look at the supply side to look how much land has to be restored in Brazil, we have more than 60 million hectares of degraded pasture that could or should be restored to the original form. So the numbers were daunting and intimidating. This wasn't the way. So we took another strategy, which is called the moonshot, and we did exactly that. What would be the size of a restoration that could be seen with naked eye from the moon? It was a joke, and we thought it was an interesting joke, but we actually calculated it. And it turned out that if it was a circle, it would be 1 million hectares. And we thought this would be a good challenge. We start with that, and then we scale down to what's possible. So that's how we started with 1 million hectares. Let's scale down to what's possible. And we went step by step. The first step was land. And land from the very high level was plenty of land available, 6 million hectares at least. Other figures you can have would be put this number to 70, 80, even 90 million, but certainly 60 million hectares of land was available for restoration in Brazil. Then we went into the granular analysis. If we take it county by county, if we take register by register, how much land is being transactioned, how much land is being bought and sold? Has anybody done this before? And the answers keep being yes and yes. The size, the depth of the market at each register of land, the number of transactions, the size of the transactions, and the examples of company that has done similar things before with pulp and paper, with soy, were very positive. So that, yes, it's perfectly possible to acquire or in any other form the control of 1 million hectares of land to restore it. Next step, are we going to be able, and Catarina made a very good presentation about the different types of restorations. Our restoration is a very active one. We collect seeds, we take a lot of the way we collect seeds is technical, it's scientifically determined, so we keep the diversity of species, the intradiversity of species. We don't collect all the seeds from the same matrix, from the same tree. So can we do this at scale? We went to talk to one professor of the University of São Paulo, Ricardo Rodrigues, that's the most senior figure in restoration in Brazil. He has worked in this for 30 years, and in 30 years, he did 30,000 hectares of restoration. We're talking about 1 million. And so the supply chain was a problem. Nobody had ever done it before at the scale we were planning to do. So we didn't have a supply chain for seeds and seedlings. And so we decided to start one. We bought Bioflora, which was one of the oldest and certainly the most prestigious nursery of native trees in Brazil. It worked half as a commercial operation, half as a research center. Dozens of PhD theses and research papers were published based on the activities of Bioflora. And we used Bioflora as the center to train, to develop programs for training people to collect seeds close to the regions where we were planning to restore the forest. We used Bioflora as a center for develop the technology for the nurseries that we would implement close to the restoration sites. We gave financial support and training for local entrepreneurs in the local communities where we wanted to restore so they could produce the nurseries there. And we created, in little over a year, we created not only the supply chain, but a method to develop that supply chain that could scale up with us and keep scaling as we grow. And third came the planting. And this, we had always been very confident that planting wouldn't be a problem. Brazil is really a powerhouse in the agribusiness sector. Millions of hectares are planted in lots of different crops every year in Brazil. Forestry has been developing incredibly fast in Brazil. Brazil has the largest pulp and paper companies in the world, very advanced planting techniques. And they do this with contractors. So all we had to do was sit down with contractors and discuss the new protocols for restoring forests instead of planting eucalyptus. And for our surprise, they were incredibly enthusiastic. And we have some very interesting projects with companies and contractors, big and small, depending on the region, that helps us with planting. So in the end, what was a moonshot and what was just a joke, 1 million hectares, became absolutely feasible, and we are on track to do it. And with that, I want to make a comment to Ricardo, which I think you have a very interesting comment about scale, maybe the enemy of bioeconomy. I would maybe talk in favor of our type of scale, because if you have scale to restore the forest, the original forest, you can do wonderful things to bioeconomy too. For instance, in one of the restorations we have, a very large one, maybe the largest one has ever been attempted, 9,000 hectares of land. We had 70 collectors of acai working there, working in the farm before we bought, because the farm is 50% forest, 50% degraded pastures. So it's a 20,000 hectare farm. We're going to restore the 9,000 that are pasture right now. In the regional forest, there were collectors of acai. We sat down with them. We're going to overplant acai in the land where we are restoring to a level that doesn't disturb the ecological processes. We are helping them to have a more productive collection, deciding the routes, giving them safety equipment, organizing them in a cooperative, and we're not making any money out of this. We're just helping because they're going to be our partners in protecting the land and defending the land against invasion, against fire, and against everything, and that's good enough for us. And so what was before we got there a very poor community that dependent on a very unprofessional way of collecting acai, we hope we're going to transform into a brand, a system, a cooperative selling in branded acai that can be processed there because of the scale. So if you go away from having the scale to have soybeans, but go into the idea of developing scale in restoration, I think there are wonderful things you can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marcelo. Yeah, it's very inspiring to see the level of ambition and almost like you're trying to build a new industry sector, but at the same time leveraging existing players that were in adjacent sectors and also working with the community. Because obviously the problem has a very large scale. And so the challenge is how do we tackle that scale, but with approaches that are, again, relevant for each of the territorial context. I wanted now to pass the word to Jaime Mulligan. Jaime is the head of carbon neutralization science and strategy. I had to read this one because I wouldn't remember. But Jaime, I wanted to get your perspective from Amazon. I wanted to get your perspective. What role can technology play in developing this sector? And also what role are technology companies playing?
Thanks. I'll start with the latter, actually, because I think a lot of the solutions here don't need a lot of technology. They need innovation, they need courage, but not necessarily a lot of technology. Of course, at Amazon, our climate commitments and our efforts against those commitments are the vast, vast, vast majority is focused on bringing down our own corporate value chain emissions. We are the world's largest corporate buyer of renewable energy. We're electrifying our delivery fleet. We have a $2 billion venture capital fund specifically for investing in new climate technologies. We're doing a range of things across our value chain. But we know that any large company won't get to absolute zero emissions by mid-century, and globally that's where we need to be. And that means that we and every other large company has an obligation to finance additional climate mitigation outside of our value chain. And that's not philanthropy, that's a business objective, that's a mandate for ourselves. It's also a license for us to really think about how we can play a role in climate breakthroughs globally. You know, when we deal with our own value chain, we have to, specific suppliers we have to work with, specific technologies we have to deal with. Some of those are smaller, that's hard, some of those are bigger. When we go outside the value chain, we can focus on, we could just take a big, deep breath. What are the biggest challenges that we can help go tackle globally? And early on, we decided that tropical deforestation was the first thing on that list, and restoring the forest that we've lost should be the second thing on that list. We're also investing in direct air capture technology and other carbon removal technologies. When we thought about how the role that Amazon could play in protecting the forest, of course, we would like to be the protagonist, but we fairly quickly realized that's not the way this will work. And also that a patchwork of RED projects, important, can protect special areas, not going to halt deforestation within the timescales that are needed. And what really is needed are public sector mechanisms, right? Legal protections for the forest, which you have in Brazil, stronger enforcement, better agriculture sector policies, recognition of indigenous rights. These are all public sector mechanisms. The local communities and the work that they do, the guardians of the forest in the forest. But what they need is additional resources to be successful, to implement those policies, but also to have the resources for investments in sustainable economic development that allows those communities to continue to thrive, that allows those economies to continue to grow while leaving the forest intact. So we worked with the governments of Norway, then the UK, then the United States after the last presidential election to co-found the LEAF Coalition. And now we have 30 other companies that have joined us. And this is a financing platform to channel funds to tropical forest jurisdictions as deforestation rates observably decline and are verified over time. Those resources then get reinvested locally by local financial intermediaries in further sustainable economic development and forest protection at the direction of the government and the stakeholders in the consultation that happens thereafter. When I was 10 years old in the 90s, global deforestation was capturing global attention, and we had a bake sale. I don't know if you have bake sales in Brazil. You bake cookies, you bring them in, you sell them to the local community, you raise a little bit of money, and you donate it. We probably raised $100, I don't know. On Tuesday, we signed our first funding agreement with the Brazilian state of Pará for $180 million in finance to protect the forest. It's a big cake. No, we don't have to have bake sales anymore, which is because Americans need to lose weight. So that's what we're doing on forest protection. We're also prioritizing forest restoration, and we want to construct a strategy that is highly synergistic with our forest protection work. So we've been working closely with the state of Pará, and I understand the federal government is doing this as well, on a restoration concession model. And what's really compelling to me about this approach and Brazil's leadership in really driving this approach forward are a few things. One is the scale at which we can do large-scale restoration very quickly. And that's important for all kinds of reasons. Of course, scale is inherently important, but being able to have access to large tracts of land quickly allows you to go raise much larger sums of capital from both development finance institutions and the private sector. Those projects won't be viable, of course, without a credit-worthy off-taker willing to take credits at prices that are significantly higher than the global market average price. That's okay. Amazon is willing to do that. Our peers are willing to do that. What has happened in the voluntary carbon market today with prices at $3 a ton, it's just not real. And we know it's not real. We're willing to pay what it costs to do real things. What else is compelling to me about this is, and I'm observing from Seattle, so I know we have the experts in the room here, we have a pattern of land speculation in the Brazilian Amazon. We have actors who expect that either there won't be an enforcement action, or even if there is, eventually there'll be amnesty and they'll get away with it. And that creates this sort of vicious cycle. This restoration concession program sends a different signal. It says, actually, this land is going to be put into restoration. And that creates a little bit of a virtuous signal. Not only are we restoring land, changing the expectations of those actors, and you therefore could actually reduce deforestation in the process through restoration. And that will allow more finance to flow through the LEAF Coalition. I'm thrilled and privileged to be just having any small part of this. We're playing very much a support role. We have some resources. We'd like to put them to work in the Brazilian Amazon. And I want to make a key point. All of this helps Brazil to achieve its NDC. These are not ITMOs. And it doesn't make it philanthropy, but we have an obligation to provide this kind of finance, and we're thrilled to do so. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jaime. I think concessions certainly are another de-risking mechanism. And I share your concern about voluntary carbon markets. I don't know how much time we will have for that, but to me that's a conversation that we need to see how we can raise that price and also the integrity of carbon. To complete the panel, I wanted to invite Hervé Duteil. Hervé is the Chief Sustainability Officer of BNP Paribas. And so I wanted to get your perspective, Hervé, in terms of how can we attract financial flows to all these opportunities?
Sure. I'd like to restart from this debate of scale, because I represent a large universal bank, and there's many different types of financing, but I think the one that we often think about is the large at-scale capital markets, accessing we're not talking about the VC funds or the wealthy investors, but we're also asking how can we tap into this financial mass market, if you wish. And it's important to understand this notion of scale. When I went to the Amazon, actually 2 summers ago, to visit bioeconomy solutions, what appeared to me, and I think you're both right, Marcelo and Ricardo, but what appeared to me, and that's what we often see and being asked as a large bank to finance, was that the solution I could see, the issue was not to scale them, the issue was to multiply them. And there's a nuance in that, and that's how I understood the disconnect that I've been struggling with for 10 years in my position, of not understanding how the struggle we have to accelerate those financing. And the disconnect is the large corporations, especially the large financial institutions, we're used to standardization. We're used to what is industrialized. And right now we have this disconnect. So I think you're both right. Maybe it's scalable, but what comes to us when we're asked to issue bonds is not uniform, is fragmented. So the issue is how can we work in the meantime to recreate uniformization. And I'll give you three directions. One is data, one is price, and one is risk transfer. Data is critical to combat forestation. But when you have data, I'll give you very quickly 3 examples of financial solutions. One which we worked with, actually, with the IDB, Clabin, large pulp and paper company, did a loan where the interest rate, put in very simplistic terms, would move up or down depending on one KPI was reintroducing endangered or extinct species in their area of operation by 2025. And the second KPI is to reintroduce 3 of those by 2027. So when you have data, when you can measure, we can create embed financial incentives or to do well. Uruguay, in their sovereign sustainable bond, linked 2 metrics. One was on GHG emissions, but the other one was on reforestation, actually. And actually, it's quite interesting to see the nexus here that is implicit between climate and nature. And last, with another multilateral development bank, was announced a coral bond. And here, where we're actually actively working is establishing a baselining to be able to measure progress. So data is critical. Price, we spoke about it a bit earlier. We need a price on nature to industrialize those financial solutions. So far, we monetize nature, if I may say, through carbon credits, plastic credits, but that's not enough because, as you said, the services of nature is multifaceted and go way beyond the climate service. Last, risk transfer. We have a great difficulty with onboarding many of those small project developers, I would say, and that's where public-private partnership are key. And one instrument that is coming up and that's giving me a lot of hope is outcome bonds. In traditional blended finance, basically, first of all, often it's small scale. It's 100 million. It may seem big, but it's actually not big for the financial markets. The principal is at risk for the investor. In the outcome bond model, a development bank will issue a bond for their mandate, and the investor will forego initially a certain percentage of the coupon. So let's say 60% of the coupons to come. That will raise roughly $20 million upfront that can be given to a project developer, and eventually this is repaid upon success. In this model, it's the first time in a way that investors from the traditional capital markets take project development risk. What is typically taken by equity here is being shifted to the traditional market. So I think those 3 elements give you a sense of how we can scalarize, if I may say, what is currently pretty fragmented. The last thing I would like to say, which is a different direction, is we need collective action. It may seem tacky, but I'll give you 2 directions. As a bank, we are the first large bank to have established a very stringent no deforestation policy. We've been followed 2 years later by a large American bank, but frankly, we need to be much more than 10 or 20 for this to be effective. And another direction where we need collective action, there's been a lot of headlines on carbon credits, especially. It's good to be a purist, to be perfect, but we're in a situation right now where a lot of people are starting to disengage from forest-based conservation or reforestation because of the fear of criticism. Granted, it's not perfect, but overall, it's nature positive. So we need to work all together, public governments, NGOs, private sector, to restore more credibility on those forest-based projects, which are very complex, and so that we don't go so that the capital can keep flowing in those.
Thanks, Hervé. Very, very useful concepts. I think Jaime also mentioned the idea of outcome-based instruments, very important. And in terms of standardizing, IDB is working with the World Bank on investment guidelines for Amazonia bonds. And I think that could be something we're trying to begin a consultation in Cali's COP. and maybe that could be one instrument in that direction. We have a little bit of time, a bit less than I was hoping, but we have a little bit of time for interventions from the audience. We have a really powerful audience as well. So I wanted to open the mic in case anyone wants to make an intervention. Avesita, go ahead.
Hello. Okay. Thank you so much, Emma, Jaime, for putting this together. This is really exciting. Everything I heard today resonates with what we're doing. My name is Avesita Chikchon from the Moore Foundation. One thing that I would like to ask, and maybe put it as a challenge for everyone here at the table, I think we have the right people here. So, in December of 2023, IDB, Benedez, CAF, Fomplata announced $10 billion for regional integration routes in South America. And as we know, the construction of roads has several kinds of impacts. And the Science Panel for the Amazon has a chapter analyzing that. So facing this reality, I would like to know the speed and the scale in which this table and what you represent and the people that you work with can respond to this. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have routes of integration. What I'm saying is, to what extent everything that we've been talking about here can respond to the risks of constructing new roads that will integrate South America and will have a large impact in the Amazon. Additionally, as we have heard today, restoration cannot keep up with the pace of deforestation. So we need to continue to aim to conserve nature as it is. And even though when you start putting numbers into it, you need to show additionality, right? And sometimes we cannot use red for certain things. We have to talk about biodiversity credits and other things like that, but it has not been proven yet. Anyway, so that is my question, my challenge. From the point of view of the Moore Foundation, we have been supporting the SPA from the beginning, and our intention is to have it applied, right? Not just to make it some abstract construct and discussions in academic circles, but also apply it. And we have one reality to apply it with, two in the short term. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Avesita. I'll take one or two more questions or interventions, and then I'll send it back to the panel if there's anyone else that would like to. So let's take these two.
Thanks so much. So Olga Puntas from JP Morgan. I had a question for James. So financing platform, where's financing coming from? And then you said you signed with Para the 180 million. So is it a grant, or how do you account for where the money is going? And then overall, is it all about neutralization, decarbonization, meaning any project qualifies, which shows decarbonization in the Amazon? So how do you keep any project accountable? And if the money coming from, I don't know, JP Morgan, BNP Paribas, do you report back to them? So kind of a little more where this mysterious platform gets money from.
Hi, it's Roberto Vac, also a member of the Strategic Committee of the Science Panel for the Amazon. My point is, I would like to hear a bit more about market development. I think we are talking a lot about financial mechanisms, but not enough on market development, especially when we talk and we deal with environmental services market, of course, voluntary market, carbon, all of that, but also market of non-timber products and especially market of related to tropical timber. So I think the tropical timber market is under enormous risks at the moment. It's something that is getting close to the end, and I really believe that the restoration agenda can serve on the further development of the use of timber in different sectors, construction, all that, and we are not really talking and addressing the importance and the opportunities in this field.
Thanks a lot. So I'll bring it back now to the panelists to react to those questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take more interventions from the audience. So I don't know if any one of our panelists want to take any of the questions, both from the science panel as well as private sector. Ilona.
Sorry. So we have, of course, the same concern, and I think part of the partnerships that we're doing with the IDB, we're knowledge partners of the Amazon bond, especially to look into this lens of risk. So basically, how do you integrate development, climate, and nature into the Amazon bonds guideline, for instance? So that's, I think, part of that. But I think the challenge here is not only when you actually give the access to the credit, is how we actually help the MDBs and the financial institutions to operationalize a monitoring system there, and that actually the compliance, but plus the, let's say, the nature positive side of all these products are being implemented. So it will be on us to be following, to be helping, and to be sure that this is implemented in a way that doesn't cause more stress. I mean, we are really worried about the roads, and for a reason, not, but people are stuck in the dry rivers now. So what do we do? So I think this is a very serious conversation. Ricardo knows, and all of that. So happy to continue.
I can answer your question. The LEAF Coalition structures emission reduction purchase agreements, which is a carbon credit transaction. And so the funds come from the balance sheets of companies like Amazon. They go through an intermediary, an NGO called Emergent, based in the United States. Those funds then flow to a financial intermediary on the ground that's selected by the jurisdiction on the other end, in this case, the state of Pará. Those funds then get reinvested by that intermediary at the direction of the state in a variety of projects and benefit sharing mechanisms with indigenous peoples and in state enforcement efforts and the like. It's a purchase agreement. So that, yeah.
First, concerning your question, if we consider that forest is the most important infrastructure that we have in Latin America, because it provides water, climate, biodiversity, energy, etc., all projects that threaten forest nowadays must be critically examined. And my feelings, the integration routes, we have to ask integration for what and for whom. And my feeling is that the huge investment, international investment that are being planned through integration routes, well, is addressed to reduce the cost of commodity exportation to Asia. And it's not thought, I don't see that there could be a kind of secondary effect in the integration of people activities. That I don't see it in the plans. Concerning tropical timber markets, Roberto, timber is a very strong example of the monotony mindset in the entrepreneurial sector in Brazil. It's very important. The impact of cement production in climate is terrible. In the management of cities is terrible. Timber has a future very important, but we can't base a timber economy in two products as we do in Brazil. So you're right. And concerning scale, I think many things. I didn't realize the potential that regeneration, the scale in the regeneration could be on bioeconomy. My point is we have to avoid monotony production as it has been doing as acai, for instance. And it's so huge quantity of products in the Amazon. And the main obstacle is its micro-industrialization and their access to market. Valmir, with very, very good colleagues, Marcelo, Salazar, are working in projects trying to address this issue.
Well, I think back to you, Emma. I think if there's no more interventions from the panel, we can begin to wrap the session. From my part, and I'll pass it on to you, thank you very much for all the participation. Our idea here was to have this multi-stakeholder conversation and begin to take notes to develop a narrative towards COP30, which I think is the moment where we'll have an opportunity to make these points really visible and really impactful. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. This was a great dialogue. I think we, as I said, we, with the IDB, with the World Bank, will continue dialogues until we go to Belém, very much trying to get the policy recommendations, the analysis of the science panel, also in discussion with potential financiers. I think we get very clear, and it's fantastic that unfortunately Ambassador Correa do Lago had to leave, but I think it's very clear his message that they're going to work so much on the COP for Belém for a sophisticated dialogue on tropical forests. And I think this is very important. Yes, we know that fossil fuels is the #1 priority, and it should be the #1 priority, the decarbonation of the economies, but I think it's so important also the tropical forests, and Brazil obviously is going to take a tremendous leadership in that area. Also, we hear very clearly that diversity. The Amazon is very diverse, and again, they come to have different solutions, different scales, and also so much more knowledge that needs to be put in the equation. And in that sense, I think we very much like the panel to continue working on those new issues and contribute to these kind of dialogues and benefit also from your own experience. I think at some point it would be good perhaps, and this is my own thinking of, the panel accompanying some of the experimentation on restoration, just to learn and eventually to disseminate to other regions and other countries. And I think finally, what I think is extremely important is that it's very clear that it's tremendous level of experimentation, new financial tools, new business models. And again, it seems to me that Brazil and some of the other Amazonian countries could take leadership in this role and contribute to other regions of the world like the Congo or Southeast Asia. So this was very rich. Thank you all very much. And you're going to hear back from us because we'll continue with these dialogues until we go to Belém. Thank you.